Hello.
Hey, hey.
We've changed location. I don't even know why did we change location.
One of our chairs, one of our bar stools is broke.
Toddler decides to push it and it's broken. So she's pushing everything over, dragging everything. So hopefully you can hear us.
I've not had a notification yet.
So we'll wait around, let you get notifications that we are live. I don't know.
I wouldn't get a notification because it's me, isn't it?
Yeah. So we're going to wait around and let you get notifications. Is it a bit far away, or do you reckon I should bring it a bit closer? Or do you want to bring it a bit closer? You probably get out easier than me.
That sounds alright. Can you hear us okay? Let us know that you can hear us okay. I feel like I'm a bit like a news reporter. And today's news is...
Yes, good evening, Shelley. Yes, let us all know how you're feeling. Ellie's not just staring back. Yeah, Ellie can put it on mute so we can hear ourselves. Ellie's got it so she can see the comments. So we're going to talk a little bit about relationships with food. I think it's something that we'll wait another 20, 30 seconds before we do get started. Before we do get started.
I know, I don't want to stand next to Ryan.
Do you know the best thing about this lockdown is the tannage has been top notch, because it's like, and we lived here last year, same house, and we don't recall being in the garden much, but it's like a sun trap. So yeah, absolutely loving it.
Kiara says nice pot.
And I had Ellie even said they wanted to say anything about my pot. Today I've had 2, 3, 5 minute naps. And been woken up by me every time I'm trying to get a bit of sun. Anyway, we're going to get talking now. Hopefully you're all here. We're going to talk about relationships with food. And the first thing I wanted to say is I feel like a lot of the time whenever anybody mentions relationships with food, we assume it's on a negative thing. And it's important to understand that we have all got relationships with food. It's just how that relationship is. It's like a relationship with a person. It can be a positive one, it can be a negative one, it can be one that just doesn't serve you in the right way. And it's important that we understand that from the very get-go, that we're not trying to remove a relationship with food. We're just trying to make sure that we're aware of how it is. Is it a good one? Is it one that we want to continue with? Or is it one that we want to work on to improve?
And it also can possibly be situational as well. Like there could be possible trigger points that can maybe during certain situations you feel really good when it comes to your food, but then it also can be like, there might be, you recognise signs that might actually trigger you, say like certain emotions that can perhaps lead you down a pathway you'd question there's an emotional attachment to food, and that's something that we can work on. So it's always remembering as well that when it comes to a relationship with food, it can sometimes change. So remember as well, like your current situation that we're all in right now isn't of the norm. So if you have recognised changes to your relationship with food, you're not alone. I can imagine probably like 99% of people right now have probably experienced whether it's an emotional attachment with food or have used food in a way that is not possibly how they would have done before all this. But it's also remembering as well, become aware of it, be honest, and then let us help you as well. If you have noticed changes to your relationship with food, becoming aware is the biggest and first most important step that you can take.
Yes, and then it's also important to question things, because for me, like, you have to question that relationship because I find a lot of the time we can have a negative thing and something happens and then we roll off on that. For example, like an emotional eating, if you do something once you find you're emotionally eating, and even the alcohol comes under this as well, and we then think, I've got a bad relationship with food, we're planting that seed that then can fester and make a situation worse. Whereas if we actually said, you know what, I ate and I felt good from it at that one point, that doesn't mean you've had a poor relationship with food. It's actually just understanding that I did that, but it's not something I want to do longer term. And also understanding how long these habits have been in place, because every time we talk about relationship with food, I'll talk back to how, babies, we cry, we're upset. The first thing we're often given is a bottle, which then associates food, milk, etc. with making us feel good and feel better. And sometimes, yes, it can do, but often we need to then look at the bigger picture of actually how does it feel afterwards, and then that's the sort of thing where it comes down to addressing that relationship further down the line.
Yeah, and a good way to first think about it is like, what's the first thought that you have when you think about food? I know that Esther says I love food, and like
too much, she said.
We do. Oh, I used to only read the first bit. So it's important. Like we want you to. The most important thing that we want for you all everyone that we coach is to have like a healthy relationship with food. So it's good to enjoy your food. It's just looking at perhaps your terminology when it comes to food, like how you describe it, or is it becoming an obsession, things like that. But also the way that you feel. So say after a meal, the emotional response that you feel from it, like is it sometimes like a guilt feeling, and things like that, because that's like signs that we want to help work on. Like we want you to think of food as, yes, obviously we all socialise when it comes to food. Food's a big aspect when it comes to socialising. There's like celebrations and things like that. But also remembering as well, like food's there to nourish your body. So food there to provide your body with nutrients for you to feel the best. So that's also an important part when it comes to nutrition, is using a way so you feel the best too. So you can utilise it. A lot of people utilise it and they get a negative response. Like, you know, when we apply that emotion and we have foods that perhaps we think that we crave, when really it's kind of looking at foods that actually help boost how you feel too.
Yeah, and I think like me and Ellie have both overcome unhealthy relationships with food, and you know, it's something that I'd probably say I'm a little bit further behind in terms of Ellie, whereas I sometimes will want to emotionally eat. I've just got Ellie as my sort of professional hand slapper who slaps food out of my hand. But anyway, so it's sometimes understanding that it can take a long time to address things if it's possibly a negative relationship where it sort of can hold you back. But for me, the biggest factor is about understanding the language and the thought processes that we're having around food. So for when we're looking at food, it's understanding that it's a tool that we use to, like Ellie said, nourish our body, and it can also be a tool that helps bring people together. So we can understand that actually food, yes, it's fuel, but we're not that sad that we'll turn around and say, you know, it's just numbers, it's calories, you know, because that's what it is in principle. But we understand that actually, you know, it's a social thing that's part of it. So it's understanding that how you address that, everyone will have a different approach. You know, for us, like we say to many of you, is can you intermittent fast, reduce your calories down and just have a massive meal? Do that. That's cool if it works for you. If it doesn't, you're someone who needs to go over, then it would be like, right, we'll go over your foods. Don't have guilt. We don't want any emotional attachment to you increasing the calories that day, but just be prepared that it might slow your progress. If you socialise a lot, you're probably going to be limited to what progress you can see. It's actually just being more aware of it, rather than actually trying to hammer yourself and be hard on yourself because you enjoy food. And that's why you'll notice we don't use labels. We've never told any of you to cut a food out that I can think of in this group. The only time we might have told you to reduce or cut something out is if you're having a negative symptom related to a certain food group. We will never say that's unhealthy. We hate the term clean food. We'll obviously say, can we try and change that for a more nutrient-dense food if we're finding certain symptoms?
That we apply sort of like a scientific way to describe to eat, because clean eating, like what the hell is that? Like, you're not putting bleach on your food. So let's just scrap the whole clean eating, good fats, bad fats, good food, naughty food, things like that. It doesn't exist. So yeah, we all got rid of those labels. Anyway, and what I wanted to say is, as well, is coming back to obviously how we coach now is lifestyle based. That's why we will never ever dictate to you a food plan. Yes, we have like little guides on the membership site to kind of perhaps help you. Say if you were going to go on holiday or you wanted to do a cut and you perhaps just wanted, I don't know, like a short term thing, but you also know what happens with a short term strict thing is they're not sustainable, but you know that they are there to follow. Say if you wanted that, but we follow lifestyle based approach, so it's like the flexible dieting approach where you can still have and include the foods that you love, so ticking the box of satiety, because we want you to also kind of, you know, feel satisfied when you are having your meals rather than go just eating it. You know, I said about the nourishment, obviously, yeah, we want you to choose foods that are going to nourish you, but also from a mental aspect as well, where you're getting that, you know, that feel good. I've gone through where I've eaten food that I'm just sort of like going for it because I think I need to eat it, and I gain nothing from it from a long-term perspective. So when it comes to your nutrition, we want you to be thinking from a long-term perspective, something that you can stick to forever. You're still enjoying foods that you love, but you're not depriving yourself, but also you've got that balance of a healthy relationship where there's no longer any more binges and things like that. You're not obsessing of a food group. You're not feeling missing out and things like that.
Yeah, and that's why we always say when you first start with us, don't cut anything out. don't feel like you need to reduce things. It's like Char said there. Obviously, we've helped them with awareness of nutrition, and that's what we want you to be. For us, like we always say, everyone has different levels of what they want when they come to us in terms of nutrition. Like in terms of, do they just want right, I can eat this and just go with it, or do they want to understand more? And obviously our goal, even though you might not come to us for that, is to give you a basic understanding at very least about nutrition, so that you understand roughly where you can get carbohydrates from, roughly where you can get protein from, roughly where you get fat. And we want you to understand that, because that helps improve the relationship, because we know awareness is key. We talk about it time and time again. And when we start to do that, we can then start to understand how the body responds relating to that, so that then we'll question things. And we understand at times, we all have moments of weakness. I'd be lying if I never say, I'll give the girls, children have 365,000 snacks a day. Like, I'll often put the odd biscuit in, and then I'll be like, oh, no. And then, I'll track it and I think I've got to reduce my carbs down now, so that's my snack in the evening.
Yeah.
And then be frustrated. And sometimes, sometimes I go over my calories a little bit. It's not like I don't beat myself up about it, but what I then do is start to question when I journal, and this is where we always link it back in the end to mindset, is I'll journal and I'll question my commitment to my own goals, and I'll question my own belief in terms of what I've done, and question why it happened and how I'm going to prevent that from continuing to happen. And then I'll make a decision. Do you know what? Do I need to make sure I'm saving enough calories so that I have a biscuit when they're having it? I'll reduce something down. But that's where you have the tools to make that decision. But the key behind it is understanding why it's happened. Was it habitual? Was it me?
Yeah. No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. And it's also remembering as well, like, a one-off day is a one-off day. But it's also, are these one-off days happening more? Because, like, I think we've actually feel like sometimes it's saying, oh, it's a new day tomorrow. And we absolutely, totally agree. Like, if you've had like a one-off day and things have just gone to shit, and you've just thought, you just had one of those days, we're human, we get it. So, yeah, we want that clear. But if these one-off days now are happening on a weekly occurrence, or more and often, that's when we're going to have to say, it's not a new day tomorrow. I really need to work on them now, because there's obviously a reason why this keeps happening. Whether whatever you're choosing to do when it comes to your meals aren't realistic, they're not taking into consideration foods that you enjoy. There's a relationship, unhealthy relationship forming somewhere, whether it's an emotional response, there's a trigger point. So you've created a habit that then sends a signal to your brain that when you feel a certain emotion, your way to cope with it is to deal with food. Whereas we're then going to help you, if we can draw you back and stay in that moment, because remember that your initial emotion wasn't hunger. Your initial emotion perhaps was sadness, anger, worry, upset, frustration, or whatever it was. That's what we need to work on, especially if this is happening more often. And that's why we want you to reach out to us.
Yeah, and then when you're doing that, it's also becoming aware of actually, when you look back to why do you choose these foods, why do you turn to those foods, or why do you keep slipping? Because like we often say, like, knowledge is the key at the start, but knowledge about application is almost pointless. So sometimes it's actually, why do we not apply that knowledge that we have? And then that's the question that I'd be asking. And sometimes it actually it's not to do with the food, it's actually to do with how you feel about yourself. And that's where we want to then come back to find out, why are you not nourishing your body? So a lot of the time, when we do these challenges where we talk a lot about colours in foods and stuff like that, we see loads and loads of colour, and then over time the colour slowly slips, where we end up seeing a little bit more beige, or we start to see things sliding. And it's like, well, how much, when you all go through, say we do a colour challenge, we know most use report you've got more energy. We know you're less bloated. You often find you're holding less water. So we can hold all of these thoughts, and we know that we're sort of seeing these positive changes by doing it. But often things slip back. I would then start to question, why is it, she said there, why would it slip back to that? And that's where we want you to come to understand it. Hopefully that's making sense. So basically the key to it is questioning where you're at, and why are you at that point, and then we can help unfold that, by the way. Okay, we're not expecting you to sort of just do this straight on your own. And that's where we would say, use the group, use us, and we want to try and unfold that if you do feel like you've got an unhealthy relationship with food, if it's a fixation with food. And we know a lot of other methods out there, and I'll probably say it, a lot of other people don't like what I'd say, is they promote unhealthy relationships with food. They're depriving people of whole food groups. They're telling people to cut things out. They're calling foods a treat, and yous aren't you aren't animals, you don't need to be rewarded with food. You can implement a nutrition thing that you like any day of the week. Of course, there's certain things, if you know, like for us, we will have the sort of calorie dense foods on the weekend and we focus less on nutrient dense. But that's not because it's a treat. That's just because we know we actually feel better Monday to Friday by having more colour in our food, by having nutrient dense foods. We feel better for it. So on the weekend we actually say, do you know what? We can have the calorie dense foods. We're probably not going to feel quite as good of it, but I actually enjoy the taste of it. So I do get that satisfaction, and that's balance. You know, there's no avoidance. If it's a Tuesday night and we both really, really wanted to have a pizza, we'd save our calories and have a pizza.
I
would.
I couldn't do it. I just have this thing, like, I just couldn't do it during the week. What I was going to say as well, just become aware of, like, your thoughts associated and the words that you use to describe food as well. Like, you might not even realise you do it. It's probably even, like, habitual. So just become aware of it. Like, you know, even if you're telling yourself, oh, I can't eat that because it's naughty, just, obviously we've explained before, there is no such thing as naughty. As long as it fits your numbers, it's all good. We're just going to go and...
Yeah, so Esther loves carbs, always have done. It's a cultural thing. Yes, you know, we completely appreciate that. I would actually say it's a Western world thing as well. You know, it's very common to be a carb-dense diet. I would say 70-80% of new clients that come to us or all to use, I'd say majority of you probably when you first started found that your diet was very much carb dense and protein low compared to what we have. Obviously we do promote a high protein diet. We've obviously gone over the reasons why we do that quite a few times, but it does take time, and it's obviously, like you said there, because it's been a cultural thing, it's going to take a bit of patience, it's going to take a bit of understanding, but I'm sure you're seeing results, which is what should hopefully promote that, but don't feel like you're deprived it. So if there's certain carbohydrate meals that you feel you're missing out on, what I would say is have a day where you know you're going to be slightly less worried about hitting your protein. We'd always say try and get your protein up as much as you can, but like we said, on a weekend I'll have as much protein as I can early in the day, and I'll have minimal carbs, minimal fats, and then in the evening I can be heavy carb and fat, and then that's my calories. So, you know, don't deprive yourself of these things. That's really key. So Kiara there was really stressed yesterday, nearly turned chocolate but didn't, said fuck it, went. That's perfect, and that's exactly what we want you to say. You're not depriving yourself.
And like your relationship with food, Kiara, I would say has like incredibly like progressed and improved. Like the last, I don't know, 6-8 months now.
Yeah, since the nutrition in January, I would say.
Yeah, I would say and you can see that new results.
And when you first joined, I don't think we ever really discussed relationships with food and stuff like that. So I definitely think it's something that obviously we've found more and more apparent, which has obviously helped us in terms of the results you're seeing. So yes, Nagar, answering your question in one word, yes, I definitely think that it can be habitual, 100%, but habits can be broken as well. And just like any sort of underlying emotions, if they are there, can be reversed. You know, it's not easy. This is part of the reason why people don't want to do this. You know, every one of you will know we don't promote an overnight fix in terms of the results. Most people will lose weight relatively quickly when they first start, but then it's keeping it off and it's maintaining it is where the habits fall in, and it's addressing the relationship. So either or, the response is still the same. They can be overcome. I would say if it's an emotional thing, it's more difficult to change because we need to question it. And then when it's an emotion, it's not necessarily just linked to food. There could be 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 different triggers that are causing that turn to food. So the food is the response based on all these different things.
Emotions.
And that's a much more complex issue. Whereas if it's habitual, there's obviously then it's understanding, and that's where we would say get into the habit of making sure you only track what's going in your mouth constantly. Don't
do it as you go. Especially if you're noticing perhaps this is coming more often, then it's kind of going back and start doing, you know, as you go. It's also remembering the first time you go over, it then becomes easier to then go over. So it's like, you know, obviously we talked about respecting calories. It's then going back to that, you know, like journaling, like how it makes you feel like going over, applying logic as well to it. Because when we talk about like, when we're going over our calories, it's essentially like you're eating more than your body necessarily wants. And then you think about, okay, what comes as a byproduct of that? Are you happy with a byproduct of continually eating over your calories? How you would feel? So it's kind of just also applying the logic together with an emotional response of how you would feel as a result of it, if that makes sense as well. Because it's remembering, I know, like, you know, we talk about how wanting results in the direction that we want to go, but often our actions are going in a direction that we don't want to really necessarily go. So it's then applying that commitment to your goals, which is, again, journaling, getting your brain connected with the emotions, feeling how you really feel, and then allow yourself to feel it. You know, be honest with yourself with the emotions that you're currently feeling.
Yeah, and if it is in terms of the habits, like the biggest one, I would say, the first one that I would say helps improve or kick that habit of overeating is the tracking the whole day in advance. So some of you, like, who have where we sort of check your food diaries, we see you've tracked the whole day in advance. Like, that is foolproof, literally. Like, if you're tracking in advance 95, probably even 99% of the time, you're not going to go wrong. Of course, something can throw you out one day. You might be there and somebody offers you something and it has to be tweaked. We get that. But in the grand scheme of it, if you've planned your whole day in advance, and, you know, I sort of get it, because Ellie is somebody who's like, I don't know what I fancy. So I do get that. I'm not like that. I never really fancy a certain food. I can eat anything at any time. So it's so you might need to address that side of it. But what you can also do is actually plan, like, you know, split your calories. You know, if you're not a snacker, then split your calories over 3 or 4 or 2 meals, however many meals you have. Split your calories and work out, right, I know I'm going to have a 500 calorie dinner, so I need to split the rest of my calories, and just do it that way if it works.
And it's funny that Brian says that, because there's it's white fish for me. I find that I have to be in a particular mood, because we have like our cod fillets, and I also say to Brian, I have to be in a certain mood. But the thing is, though, it's all stories that I've told myself, because when it's put on the plate, like we had it the other day for lunch, I freaking loved it. It was like the most amazing meal. So I have to remind myself that whitefish I actually do really enjoy, but it's just these stories that I've created in my head that I feel as if I want something else. So yeah, we're going back to these.
Yeah, that's helpful. Joan and why it's happened. Interesting to understand. Yes. So what we will do, we'll go through the low carb, high fat, high carb diet after we've sort of talked the relationship with food. Okay, this may end up going on quite a bit, as it often does with nutrition, which is totally cool as long as. But if we find the numbers are dropping off, so like we've got like 8, if we find that we're dropping to like 4, we might just finish it and talk about it next week, just so that we appreciate how busy you are. I have gone back into the habit of turn to food when angry, stressed, especially. Yes, it's difficult, you know, at the moment, and, you know, we don't make excuses for anybody, but it is a very challenging time for everybody at the moment, you know, and it's understanding that food is a temporary fix. And this is the thing, what I find, like, when I'm someone, because I have my urges where I can turn to food, and like I can eat everything in sight, you know, and it's reminding yourself that food is only going to be a temporary fix, and often actually longer term makes you feel worse, because the negative effect, like you said there, the byproduct of constantly turning to food is actually you feel like crap, because no one's turning to a salad, are they? You turn to calorie dense food, so you're going over your calories. Then the other things are you start to feel sluggish, you probably feel more bloated, your digestive system wreaks havoc with you, your weight slightly goes on, you feel guilty, possibly affects your sleep, waking up with bad breath. We could list literally all these different things that we know you know about. We don't need to even tell you them, but what it is reminding yourself of them. So if you're finding it at the moment, it's a time, and anyone who's doing this, you're constantly finding where you're overeating and turning to food, I would be listing the negative effects of doing it to remind yourself. That's just the way that I am, because I'm motivated by not wanting to feel a certain way. If you're motivated by wanting to feel a certain way, I would remind yourself of all the things you'll feel by not doing it.
And then it's also remembering as well, especially if you notice that you're saying, like, if you're feeling angry and stressed, you know, relating to children or whatever, like, we totally get it, because like I feel that's like a common emotion that I'm feeling right now. So it's remembering as well, okay, you're feeling stressed and you're feeling angry. What's going to help you stay in that moment, and ask yourself what can work for you in that moment to kind of cope or deal with those emotions. If food is one of those, then that's what you have to remind yourself, perhaps when you, I don't know, like later on, and you're not happy with, I don't know, progress or whatever you've made, but remember that you've made a conscious decision, because at that present time that helped you deal with the stress and the anger. But if you know in yourself that perhaps that turning to food isn't helping deal with that stress and the anger, then we need to look at coping mechanisms that will help with the stress and the anger, whether it's removing yourself from a situation. It's very difficult when there's children involved because you can't just walk out the door and say, see you later. Fend for yourself. Perhaps breathing practices, putting, a YouTube channel with a meditation for you all to take time out and to just zone out for 3-5 minutes for you to kind of gather your thoughts, bring yourself back into reality, and just say it out loud exactly what it's saying. Say, I'm pissed off right now because X, Y, and Z, and then deal with it. I need to listen to my advice right now.
Yeah, and I think that the key thing is to finding other solutions to the concerns, problems, issues, what are being arisen at any time. Because like we just said, we can list all the negative things when we have turned to food. We get that it's a habit, and it's a very hard habit, because like Cara said there, she still has a temptation there. It's probably a temptation that's always going to be there, but that's where we're switching from that emotion-based decision to a logic-based one. Because emotion is dangerous, particularly when it comes to making decisions that are going to be impacting on your goals ultimately, because that's what it does do. So we want to make sure that we sort of try to remove emotion. We can have emotion towards food as long as we understand that emotion is something that isn't actually productive in terms of results and feeling. We need to look at the logic, and that's the fine line. It takes time, and I would probably say is don't feel bad if you do turn to food. That like we said, we want to get rid of the guilt. Like that saying, tomorrow's another day. But remember, tomorrow's another day, but let's not make sure it keeps happening. And if it keeps happening, can we actually stop it before it happens? Like Ellie said, finding other solutions. What else have we seen there? Tracking weekend barbecue as much as I can to get an idea of macros. Yeah, the thing is, like with barbecues, eating out, and etc. We've talked about it as well a few times. Is we tend to overestimate. It's always going to be a bit more of a challenge, particularly if you haven't purchased the food yourself. We don't expect you to be those type of people, because trust me, we've socialised with those type of people who, can you send me the exact recipe? And we don't expect that. That's not real life most of the time. I would be saying, look, if you're going out and you're having burger and chips and stuff, put it on. Just pick a burger. We tend to say pick a higher calorie one. Obviously, if you're looking at it and you're thinking, actually, I know when I get there it's a smaller serving than what I thought because they were a little bit tight with their portions, then I would just reduce it down and say you've got a few more calories for an extra drink, or do it that way. But overestimate it is better to get an idea. Obviously, if you can and you're putting it yourself, scan the barcodes and do it that way is preferable. But don't. We don't expect you to be someone who's getting dumped from invites because you're asking for the recipe so you can track it on MyFitnessPal. Whitefish is the one, yes.
Yeah, I need to remind myself that.
So has anyone got any more questions on emotions with food, relationships with food, before we move on? Because obviously there was a couple of other questions, talking supplements, we're talking high carb, low carb, diets. I think the key to us with relationships with food is, I think it's something that is a constant evolving thing, and it's not something that you could ever say, I'm always going to have this perfect relationship with food, because things change and life's change, and we want to make sure that we always try to keep it positive, but we're constantly aware of it, and that's the key. I feel like we always say awareness is key, but it really is. And understanding that food isn't separate to everything else. Like how often do you probably tell yourself is, once I'm into the training, the diet's better because it's linked to that. Actually, once I'm emotionally in place, the diet's better. Nutrition links to everything. Once I'm leading a more active lifestyle, I'm more active, the diet's better.
Because then like your food that you're going to eat is going to help your recovery, it's going to help with your performance, it's going to help with your sleep, it's going to, and so forth. And it's like the other way around as well, like how being active also helps promote a healthy relationship with food, or having a better quality night's sleep is going to help with your food choices. They're all interlinked. So it's kind of working on, you as a person as whole, and what, how you want to feel and what you honestly think needs, the focus. And like we always say when we do the scoring of the checking forms, often those scores might change in different areas depending on how your week's gone. Like stress, sometimes stress has gone up, you find that your food choices, your nutrition score has also gone low. So they're always interlinked, hence why on the check-in forms we have the scores, because we know that everything can change, especially right now. Emotions are fucking crazy. I feel as if I felt all different emotions 10 times, a million times a day.
Yeah, there was one other thing actually that I did want to touch on because it crops up regularly, obviously in the group, is time of the month and relationship to food. Because it, to me, obviously, you know, I actually do physically.
He thinks he gets symptoms,
but and it's always around early. But I tend to be a couple of days behind. But honestly, I think it's a thing. But and we have researched, and there can be like a psychological impact on it. But anyway, that's me getting that.
It's always about bias.
That's me getting distracted. So with time of the month, okay, I think the key to remember is to understand your body, because no two women have the same periods. Everyone has different symptoms. Everyone has different cycles.
Yeah.
Everyone has different things. But the thing what I wanted to try and get across with you is to understand that, like, and Ellie's talked about this a few times, is if you tell yourself you always crave a certain food type at the time of the month or build up to time of the month, let me tell you, you will always crave it. So it's understanding that the stories you're telling yourself are probably having an impact on the way that you're feeling around time of the month, and that's why we bring it back to journaling. And it is sometimes becoming more aware that, you know, you might need to play about, and we help with that. If you can show us that you're tracking and you're regularly and you're even tracking your cycle and aware of it, we will help you implement a macro split around those times of the month if it's going to help. What we can also do is, for some of you, which we've already done, is you'd have an extra sort of 150 calories 2 to 3 days. The last 2 to 3 days of your cycle makes a huge difference to you. But we don't need to just do it and just I overate this month, because if you do it and you haven't updated, and this is a mad thing, and you know, if you haven't updated your MyFitnessPal to give you that 150 calories, but you've overeaten by 150 calories because you told yourself it, what you're then doing is losing that respect for the calorie goal. And that's why I think it's key that if you know, right, my last 3 days, so day 25 to 28, I constantly I'm more hungry. I also feel more moody, so I feel like I need more food. We can address that. We'll help you with it. Sometimes it doesn't need more food. It's just changing.
You might find different months your appetite's higher than others.
But we would then be saying up your calories for that day on MyFitnessPal as well, because the psychological difference behind hitting calories every day. Once you leave your calories once, go over them, and this is why we say within 10% is cool. But if you notice, once you go over your calories by even 50 calories, 30 calories, okay, and we had a conversation with someone about this last week, because it started off just being 30 calories, and that's fine. You know, 30 calories is not going to make a difference. We will never tell you off being 30 calories over. But then that plants a seed. I'm just 30 calories. Next day, 50 calories. And then before you know it, you've had a few weeks, you've had a good couple of days, but I'm over by 50 this time. So the following day it's 100, and it builds up. So what we're then doing is losing that respect for that calorie goal that we've set.
And
so
before you know it.
Yeah. So what we'd rather do. So what we'd rather do is understand.
I love how he's talking about period as if he knows what the fuck we're going through.
So what we'd rather do is understand it so that we can gain that calorie respect. And if we find that you're feeling that you need more, we don't want you feeling hungry. We would help you address that so that you go up.
And when we're talking about these extra calories as well, ideally we want you to utilise these extra calories from foods that are actually going to provide you with nourishment. So, you know, we're talking about nourishment rich, whether it's a case of you've increased your fats. So obviously we know that fats have more calories per 1 gram. So if it's a case that you're having oily fish and that's, you know, calorie dense, so your calories have gone over, that's what we would rather you utilise those calories towards. Because if you think about the symptoms that you have, like towards, whether it's the end of your cycle or even the first 3 days of your cycle, it's tiredness, you know, you're low in energy, your sleep's been impacted, you get stomach cramps, you're bloating, water retention, maybe your joints are sore, things like that. So we need to think of foods that are actually going to help, you know, with those symptoms. So having like chocolate that you've been telling yourself that you're craving isn't actually going to help your body's performance to deal with those initial symptoms. So we need to think about foods that are going to help. So we talk about, you know, when we talk about good, like the fats, that helps with hormone regulation. So that's also going to help with like your moods and how you feel. So it's again like applying logic. And obviously I know that I talked about it in a couple of, I think we've done a few weeks ago, videos about what I've sort of been trial and testing. And that's I sort of changed my macros within the first like 3-4 days of my cycle, I tend to drop my carbs and go to a higher fats because, like I said, the fats help with your mood and your hormone profile. But also I tend to find I fluctuate so much with my cycle that I find that I hold a lot of water. So I have dropped my carbs a little bit if I feel that works for me. Because for me, I have PCO. I don't have PCOS, I have PCO. So I don't have, oh my God, this is really complicated. But when we were going for fertility.
The hormone imbalance.
Yeah, I have a hormonal imbalance. And so I have like lots of cysts, but I don't have PCOS. That's right, isn't it?
You don't have the hormone imbalance, but you have
I have this
polycystic ovaries.
Yeah, so I have polycystic ovaries. Anyway, we'll get there. So I find that my months change throughout. So I tend to have really good months or I have really shit months. That's also possibly emotional triggers as well for how I've been feeling with stress. But anyway, I'm going off now. So not every month expect to feel the same way. So not every month you'll need to drop your carbs. So it's listening to your body and how you feel as well. That's not getting it. That's essential too.
Yeah, and obviously, like the guy that you said, you're always hungry first day of your period. Totally understand that. I'm hungry first day of my period every month as well. No, the thing is with that, you know, we get that, but then it's sometimes now, because obviously you've told yourself that, that's also something to question now. And it's not me saying you're not hungry, by the way, because you could well be hungry every first day, but I'd possibly be questioning it. And then also,
your
like Ellie said there, it could be looking at changing macros a little bit, because the thing is with carb, we will talk about in a minute with the protein and with the carbs and fats in a minute, fats will make you feel fuller. So sometimes if you actually feel like if you do feel like your hunger is much higher, sometimes going for a little bit more a higher fat diet can help as well. So it's just being aware of that if that's what you think you're possibly going to need. So, you know, what we would say is let's look into that, question it. Is it hunger? If it is hunger, yes. Let's see, can we do something more to try and implement?
Just got to plug this in.
Where is it?
It's behind you.
It's behind you. You probably need to pull that a bit closer now.
Oh, we've got to come a bit closer now. And Kiara, so we
need the adapter.
Oh, hold on. Kiara just asked day one.
So day one of your cycle is obviously the day when your period starts. You know, obviously the average female cycle is 28 days. It can vary. We've got some clients that are 30 odd days. Some use 20 odd days. It will vary from person to person.
Mine tends to be around like 24, 26. So mine's like.
We get worried if it's 27.
I know I'm not ready for another one ever again. But yeah, so I sort of know around then. And do you know what? How I always know when my period's coming is my self-esteem, my confidence just drops, and I just know that's when it's happening, because like for whatever reason my confidence just takes a real hit.
Yeah, so hopefully that sort of answered it. First it. Oh, sorry, Nagar's already answered it. Sorry, thank you, Nagar. I think the first day of your period is the day after your period stopped. No,
so we'd say the first day of your cycle, day one is like the first day of your period. So that's like day one, and then like you ovulate day roughly for most people.
14,
yeah, mine I ovulate day 10. So it's just becoming aware. We're all so different, so become aware of that as well. Because I actually find as well ovulation date also has an impact on how you feel. Obviously, for us ladies, increase of testosterone is when our performance is optimal when it comes to training. You probably feel really good in yourself with the best time you're going to look. But then it's like, it's downhill now.
Yeah, cool. I think we've sort of been not ready for another one.
No, so I worded that wrong. We're not having any more babies.
Yeah. I think we've answered everything relating to that. We'll go on to these two topics. I think are probably ones that we could do as a whole live. Obviously, this is really interactive, so we're gonna sort of what we'll do is we'll skim over them now. And then I think if the interaction's good there, I think we could definitely do a longer video on both. Obviously, we have done several long ones on supplements, which we're happy to do again.
So we do the high carb, low fat first?
Yeah, so we'll do high carb, yeah. So obviously, first, carbohydrates and fats. We know that they're both the macros that we have less importance of when it comes to clients starting with us. So what we normally say when you start with us, let's focus, get your protein up. Then we often promote a low-fat, higher carb diet. Now, the main rationale behind us doing that is purely from a feel-good perspective, okay? That's the main reason why we would prefer you had lower fats, higher carbs, because generally speaking, the body's preferred source for energy is carbohydrates. But it's not an essential nutrient, okay? So if you look at fats, they are essential. There are essential fatty acids that your body needs. There are essential proteins, essential amino acids, which your body needs, but there's no such thing as essential carbohydrates, so you don't need them, but we feel better. And when we talk about performance, it's not just performance like in the gym, training and stuff like that. It's your performance day to day, you know, your energy levels, your get up and go, your
sleep,
everything, your work, everything that you've got performance wise. Generally you will feel better on a higher carbohydrate diet, and you also get more volume for your food. You eat with your eyes first. So a lot of the time, if you look at someone who's on a low carb diet, their meals are very small, and that's because fats are calorie dense. So like in fats per gram, there's 9 calories. So that's why sometimes some of you might look at and think, how did we work out that you're over your calories? Because there's 9 calories per gram of fats, but there's only 4 calories per gram of carbohydrates and protein. So you can have over double the amount of grams of protein and carbs for the same number of calories, which is why sometimes if you have like one high fat meal, you might find your percentages, if you're looking at percentages, rack up quickly. And that's why we always say, look at the grams of each to make it, so that you can see the difference behind them.
And like when we're talking, obviously we've always talked about lifestyle-based coaching. And so from a lifestyle perspective, having carbohydrates into a majority of your diet is what's going to work well, because that's how we tend to eat. You're looking at your fruits, carbohydrates, vegetables, carbohydrates, drinks that we drink often have some form of carbohydrates, and often that's the things that make us, that taste good, tends to be from a carbohydrate base. So for us, from a lifestyle coaching perspective, we would never promote any of you to stop having carbohydrates in your diet, unless for a medical reason. We've worked with someone in the past, I can think of one person in particular that we worked with who was so insulin sensitive that it was affecting numerous factors in her life, and even she went to doctors and had tests done, and then we agreed by perhaps looking at her carbohydrate intakes. So, diabetics, also perhaps have looked at a ketogenic diet. I personally could not think of anything worse for myself, because I perform much better by having carbohydrates in my diet. That's from my own perspective.
Yeah, and we also find then by having a lower fat, higher carb, your body you're going to feel much, much better rather than balancing them out. Because sometimes we see this, where your carbs are a little bit lower. So we're almost like, it's not an all or nothing, but your body wants to use one energy source. It doesn't want to keep chopping and changing. So the reason then you see like ketos, like the ketogenic diet is a diet, you probably see ads for it all the time. It's low carb, it's high fat, high protein. And the difference between that is a lot of people will think they're on a ketogenic diet just by going low carb. They're not the same. What a ketogenic diet is actually having elevated ketones running through your blood that's been produced by the liver. And that's only going to happen when you make sure that your fat's high enough, but your protein's not too high. Because if your protein's too high, it turns into glycogen, and then we start to use that for energy. Because your body wants to use energy in its easiest form, and that is going to be a sugar basically. So we don't want that too high. And then you've also then got to make sure everyone's got a different threshold with where they will fall in and out of ketosis. So if you've got somebody like me and Ellie, I'm normally when we've done it before, about 26 grams. If I have over 26 grams of carbohydrates, I fall out of ketosis. And then what you have is a 3-day period where you're struggling to get back into ketosis. So you feel like a little bit tired, you're low in energy. There's a thing called a keto cold. We're not the biggest fans of it, okay? It's something that we would only say to do if you really, really are struggling with insulin sensitivity. The most important thing what we would say is, though, when you be aware of doing that, as soon as you have like a high carb meal, you can put on like 6-7 pounds in the space of a day or two, because you're losing a lot of water, whereas when you have carbohydrates in the muscle, they bind onto water. So just be aware of that. And
so the reason, obviously, I've mentioned like around time in a month, like first few days, I tend to kind of change my macros about is purely from the water side, that I physically find that I hold a lot of water, And so for me, that's one of the reasons why I change my macros, but also from a mood and energy perspective, I found for the first 3 days where I'm feeling like trash, my sleep's been really impacted, I think my moods are really low, I think, okay, well, I'm going to kind of increase my fat from foods like avocados. I tend to go for the oily fish. You might find me I've started to have like olives, but I will only have those foods like the first 3 days of my cycle, purely to help from a mood perspective. I did notice that I didn't retain as much water, and then I actually found following the few weeks after, my cycle was much better. But I don't know, that could just be a coincidence, but that's why I'm trying testing, and obviously I always share with you like what I'm doing. It might not work for you, it might also work for you. You might find that you crave less, because I actually found that I craved a lot less by doing that too. And from an emotional side, that helps me feel good too. So if you find during your cycle, your first few days of your cycle where you're telling yourself that you're craving chocolate and that's then pushing you over your calories, maybe try that out, see if that then will help, because then you're going to feel good because you know you've kept within your calories or whatever.
Yeah, so hopefully that sort of answered it. The other thing what we'll just touch on about the fats is, although we say low fat, we don't want them like down rock bottom, because you need fat.
Yeah.
So it is important to try and make sure that you know, we normally say that you don't want to be below like 25 really. You know,
for females.
That's sort of what we would suggest. You know, if your fat's a little bit low like one day, don't stress about it. But what we don't want you is, unless you supplement, obviously if you're supplement with essential fatty acids, what your fats tend to be isn't going to matter too much if they are really low, but it's make sure that you are supplementing them, because they are important. You know, they're important for hormone regulation. They're important for your general body balance. They have a cell on there's a lining on every cell in the body that's like as fats. So it really is an important sort of nutrient. So don't disregard it. But we wouldn't promote you trying to use fats as a primary energy source in terms of a feel-good perspective.
Yeah.
And also, keto breath is horrible, by the way. Like, people who have it, they get a smelly breath. It's like one of the very common symptoms of someone who has ketosis.
And from a weight loss perspective, you don't need to do that.
Yeah.
Unless for medical reasons, and we've tried everything else with you, that would, generally speaking, from our perspective, will probably be the last thing that we would go to. We don't think it's not required.
Yes, obviously appreciate we've gone on quite a bit. There's only 3 of us on here. We will quickly talk about supplements, but we're going to do these, like we said, probably next week. We maybe do we'll go into supplements a lot more. Was there any specific questions about the supplements?
No, Kiara said that she's happy to watch the one on the website. We can perhaps I can always find it in the group, unless you have something specific.
Yeah, but have you got any specific questions about supplements? If not, what we'll do is we'll maybe talk about supplements again. It's good to have a refresher, because things are always changing as well.
And we'll get everything out. We'll do that next week. We'll get everything out that we have in our cupboard. And maybe we'll do like a refresher video. Would that be helpful?
Yes. So based on that, we'll wait around just to check if there is a question. If not, we're going to finish it up there. Ladies, listen, appreciate you staying. I mean, it has been a long one this evening. We appreciate you just coming on board and keeping this interactive, because it helps us as well, you know. And I feel like we could talk all day about it. We're not, by the way, if you've just tuned in, we're not just looking down at nothing. Ellie's phone.
Also, my phone. Yes, sir.
We can see the questions. So, no, assuming there's no more, enjoy the rest of your evening.
Have you done today's blitz? If not, go do the blitz.
Reminder, yes.
Lucas says they don't want to do a refresher, but I know it's on the website.
Okay, perfect. But if you can't find it or you do need any specifics, please reach out.
Yeah, and we'll yeah.
See you later.
Bye.